Alexander had always been the quiet type. On the interstellar colony of Proxima Station, where humans mingled freely with dozens of alien species, he was known as Anna's unassuming husband, the human who smiled politely at gatherings but rarely spoke unless spoken to. The other species found this amusing, particularly Anna's circle of Zenthari friends, who considered human males to be soft, accommodating, and rather primitive compared to their own warrior culture. Anna, a brilliant xenobiologist, had married Alexander 5 years ago on Earth, before they'd both signed up for the colonial expansion program. She loved him deeply, but even she had grown accustomed to her friend's gentle mockery of his reserved nature. The Zenthari women, Kexisha, Velnira, and Torsha, were towering four-armed warriors with iridescent scales and a culture built on strength and dominance. They adored Anna, but viewed Alexander as little more than a pleasant decoration. "Your human mate is so docile," Kexisha would purr during their weekly gatherings at Anna's home. Anna would laugh it off, but something in Alexander's eyes always flickered during these moments, something the Zenthari never bothered to notice. The turning point came during the station's annual strength games, a series of competitions where various species demonstrated their physical and mental prowess. The Zenthari always dominated the combat events, and this year, Kexisha had been boasting for weeks about her upcoming victory in the strategic combat simulation, a virtual reality battle that tested tactical thinking, reflexes, and adaptability. "Perhaps your Alexander should compete," Velnira suggested with barely concealed amusement during dinner at Anna's home the night before the games. "He's not really the competitive type," Anna said diplomatically, glancing at her husband who was quietly serving refreshments. "Of course not," Torsha added, her forearms gesturing dismissively. "Humans are built for endurance and cooperation, not combat." Alexander set down the tray and spoke for the first time that evening, his voice calm and measured. The room fell silent. Anna's eyes widened in surprise. Kexisha's mandibles clicked in what passed for a Zenthari laugh. "Alexander, the simulation is designed for trained warriors." "Perhaps," Alexander replied, meeting her gaze steadily. The next day, the amphitheater was packed. The strategic combat simulation was the highlight of the games, and word had spread that Anna's quiet human husband had entered. Most came expecting comedy. The Zenthari came expecting vindication of their superiority. The simulation placed competitors in a vast virtual battlefield with randomly generated terrain, enemies, and objectives. Success required not just combat skill, but resource management, environmental awareness, and adaptive strategy. Kexisha entered first, and her performance was impressive. She eliminated threats with brutal efficiency, completed her objectives in 47 minutes, and set a score that seemed unbeatable. When Alexander's turn came, he stepped into the simulation pod without fanfare. Anna watched nervously from the stands, surrounded by her Zenthari friends, who were already composing their post-match teasing. What happened next would become legend on Proxima Station. Alexander didn't fight like a Zenthari warrior. He didn't charge into battle or rely on overwhelming force. Instead, he analyzed the terrain, identified supply caches, and began a methodical campaign that showed a terrifying level of tactical sophistication. He set traps, created diversions, and turned the environment itself into a weapon. When he did engage enemies, he did so with calculated precision, never wasting ammunition, always maintaining multiple exit strategies. The audience watched in growing silence as Alexander's approach became clear. This wasn't the clumsy effort of an amateur. This was something else entirely, Velnira whispered, her earlier amusement evaporating. Anna's mind raced through conversations, memories, things Alexander had mentioned casually over the years that she'd never quite absorbed. His office work back on Earth. His reluctance to discuss his past career in detail. The way he sometimes woke from nightmares he wouldn't explain. Alexander completed the simulation in 31 minutes with a score that shattered Kekisha's record. When he emerged from the pod, the amphitheater erupted, not in laughter but in stunned applause. That evening, Anna's home was quieter than usual. Keksha, Velnira, and Torsha sat with their scales dimmed in a gesture of Zenthari embarrassment, while Alexander prepared tea with his usual quiet efficiency. "I believe we owe you an apology," Keksha finally said, her voice lacking its usual swagger. Alexander set down cups before each of them. "You assumed that because I'm quiet, I'm weak," Torsha asked. Anna leaned forward, realizing she wanted to know too. Alexander was silent for a moment, then spoke with that same calm voice that had always made others mistake him for simple. "I was an operator for Earth's Special Operations Command. 13 years in hostile zones, 300 missions." He looked at each of them in turn. "I came here for peace, not to prove anything. But you should understand something about humans. We're persistence hunters. We don't need to be the strongest or the fastest. We just need to be smart, adaptable, and unwilling to quit. That's how our species survived when we were prey. It's how we built civilizations." The Zenthari women absorbed this in silence. Their entire understanding of humans, of Alexander specifically, had been shattered by a 31-minute simulation. Anna asked softly, her hand finding his. Alexander smiled at his wife. "Because I didn't need to. I'm happy being your quiet husband. But I wanted your friends to understand that quiet doesn't mean harmless. Humans have survived ice ages, predators, plagues, and wars." From that day forward, the dynamics shifted. Keksha, Velnira, and Torsha still visited regularly, but now they asked Alexander's opinion on tactical matters. They trained with him, learning human combat strategies, and they never again mistook his quietness for weakness. Anna would sometimes catch her husband smiling to himself as he worked in their garden or prepared dinner, content in his peaceful life. And she understood now what she'd always known but never quite appreciated, that the most dangerous humans were often the ones who had nothing left to prove, who chose gentleness not from weakness, but from strength, and who remained quiet, not because they had nothing to say, but because they'd already said everything that mattered in the life they'd lived before. Alexander was a quiet husband. He always had been. But now everyone understood what Anna had always known in her heart, that quiet and weak were never the same thing.